Right, cool.
Okay. Well, you all came back. Thank you. We had such a big crowd last month. And I said, you know, even though this is about lichens, botanists can come. I mean, especially about the tree community, so that, you know, you can kind of fit into it. I've got some things on most of the desks, but if you don't have something on your desk, move to one that has something. I hope that you, if you had the field guide, I'm sorry, the study guide, you brought it with you. If not, you should get one of those, because there's page numbers on the slides every so often. If you want to know more, you can take a look at that page number. So that's a couple of things that are, there's also a little bucket that has moss and lichens in it. So when it comes time to try to tell the difference, you have a little bit of each. There should be a hand lens on each one, but you know what? Your cell phone works better. It depends on how old you are. Those of us who we're used to using that hand lens, and we can just whip that thing around and get look at what we want to. But younger people who aren't experienced with the hand lens and that cell phone, you can make it bigger. You can zoom in on stuff, and it works whether you're looking at a book, picture, or the real thing. So be sure you've got some of those things handy. There's a couple of little handouts on more websites where you get more information, and I put a lot more under here of different things you might want to know about at the desk where the books are sold. Anyway, full disclosure, I had to pay for both the Lichen study guide and the field guide myself, but I can't sell them because of the way the tax system is in Oklahoma. It's different in every city and every county, and I can't keep track of that. So I asked that if you're gonna buy one, order it from Brit or buy it. Yeah, buy it. You can discount it actually. It's cheaper than buying it online. But if they're out, or you're not quite sure, you can always order it online at the website first. So my reason for doing these, besides the fact that I love teaching about lichens, is I'd really like to pay for that. Those books. So the more you buy, the more I have in my retirement. Okay, so y'all know what's going on here. And let's see, I taught for 20 years at UCO, taught general biology. It's a non-major, so I hope I don't talk over your heads. I don't think I will. You know, probably most of you had at least biology in high school. So, but if you have any questions like that, be sure to raise your hand.
You know how long back that was?
I know. But I've had a few biology courses since then, so. Anyway, this is a picture of, here's Steve, there's me, last year we went to Alabama for a lichen workshop of people all over the eastern half of the United States went down there. We surveyed lichens in the state parks down there, really mostly swamps. But this is a really nice, group picture of us, one of the parks. The locals call this a bubblegum tree. Can you see the bubblegum? Lichenologists call it the Herbicellum rubro-cinctum lichens on a magnolia. Those are actually lichens. They're pink lichens, and I brought it with me. And I'll pass the only one I have, so I'm going to pass it around. And you take a look at that pink lichen. We don't have any pink lichens in Oklahoma. At least I want some help. I want to find pink lichens in Oklahoma. I haven't found them. All right. So that's actually what that is. Okay. All right. All right. I'm sure you've a million questions about lichens in tree communities. Here's some of the ones that we're going to answer tonight. But you know, if you've got any, raise your hand anytime during, because I know that we only really learn when we want to know the answer. And the answer, when the question pops in your mind, that's the best time to learn. So raise your hand when you get that question. We'll get it out to everybody. All righty. Okay. So what is a tree community? Well, for ecologists, a community is all of the living organisms in a specified area. So a tree community is not a community of trees. It's a community in trees. Okay. environments that have a lot of light can dry out really quickly. And trees, rocks, and certain soil types can hold the moisture for the whole community. That helps the fungus hold the water for the algae that live in it, that uses sunlight to make the food for itself and the fungus that it lives in, and other members of the community. You may not know that, but other members of the community also take advantage of that. Okay. Now, where do you find lichens? The lichens, mosses, fungi, and ferns can be found in most of the places that trees grow, and a few others. That's where you find sufficient sunlight and moisture, because they have to photosynthesize just like the tree does. They grow mostly on the bark. You'll find them mostly on the bark. Generally on the north side. People say that moss grows on the north side. Lichens do too. Okay. Also at the base. You know what? When we go to those lichen workshops, quite often we do it with a bunch of biologists because we go to the same places. We set up our lab tables, and we meet together. We have lab tables that everybody's looking at. Sometimes they're in separate rooms, but we meet together because we have to go to the same places to survey what we want. You can find them on shrubs, you can find them on the soil, on the ground, under rocks, on rocks, even in between the grass. Now, they grow together so closely sometimes, you can't tell them apart. There'll be lichens and moss growing in the same little bitty spot of soil, and they can grow over each other. There is a lichen that grows on the top of, kind of parasitizes, except it isn't food out of it. It grows over mosses. Eventually kills the moss, but there's mosses. So what are lichens? I've looked at a lot of high school. I used to teach high school biology probably for about 8 years. And every single one of those biology textbooks in high school, if they said anything at all about lichens, said lichens are a symbiotic relationship between algae and a fungus. They went on to something else. It's a lot more complicated than that. They are a symbiotic combination of a fungus, which is heterotrophic, with an autotrophic photosynthesizer, such as green algae or blue-green bacteria. And you can say blue-green bacteria or blue-green algae. One is just a common name and the other is more scientific than that. But they're both algae. I'll explain that later. Let's see. They can, as you can see here, they can have different body or thallus. Thallus is the word for a lichen body. And so each of those is a different species, has a different shape, different structures, different colors. They're all lichens. Okay. They are capable of making some really weird chemicals and structures. Fungi, they're notorious for the chemicals that they make anyway. And having an algae living with it just makes it more fun. Okay. But you can see they all look kind of strange. Having a similar thallus doesn't mean it's closely related. And having a different thallus doesn't mean it's not related. There are a lot of characteristics that go into identifying the lichens. They're actually classified mostly by their spores. But when you're in the field, you cannot see the spores. I mean, even if you break out your hand lens or whatever, the spores are too small to see with the hand lens. You have to get it back to the lab. So in order to identify them in the field, they don't go by the spore. They go by these weird characteristics. Okay? So I'll tell you a little bit about the stuff you couldn't see. All right? The lichens have an upper cortex of fungal hyphae. Hyphae are those really long cells that don't necessarily have a cell membrane. There's a long column, and it may be like a hollow tube, or may have a few little differentiations, a few different places where you can see different cells. or they may be a strand of beads, but they're always long, the hyphae are always long strands, and a single strand or a bunch of little beads. Anyway, that's on the top, and then you have this layer of algae, and under that, in the middle, is the medulla, and it's made out of fungal hyphae, and they're hydrophobic. In other words, water doesn't get into them very easily. They hold water on the outside between those hyphae. That enables the algae to suck that water right out of them. It doesn't have, the fungus doesn't have to give up its own water. There's enough water in between the cell to feed water to the algae to do photosynthesis. So that's what the medulla does. It holds the water. And then there's a lower cortex. Notice that it does not have algae. Most lichens lay flat, or a lot of them do anyway. And so there's no algae on this part. Now, this happens to be one of the most common thallus types, the foliose. It has this bottom layer of this lower cortex. And can you see that very well? This lower cortex can make long bundles that go down into the substrate. It's called a rhizome. It looks a little bit like a root, but it doesn't absorb anything necessarily other than water out of the substrate. Lichens don't take anything from the whatever they're living on in most cases. Oh, and I got to tell you this now. There is no rule like the one I just told you about. No rule, but there isn't an exception for it. There's an exception for every single rule that I know of.
So generally, they're not parasitic.
Except for the extreme few, they're not parasitic. Got it? Let's see. Okay, I gotta talk about this. Oh, I did cover it. Okay. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the individual thallus. This is a general rule. Okay. On the left there, you see that yellow one. It has no lower cortex because it's a crustose lichen. Its medullary hyphae hold it down to its substrate. It doesn't have rhizomes. It's yellow because the fungus produces UV absorbing pigments. UV absorbing means that UV doesn't go any deeper. It protects it from ultraviolet rays. Not all lichens have this. Not all of them need it. Places like Oklahoma, where we have a lot of UV sunlight, it's more common to have pigments in that upper cortex, but it's not a rule. Okay. That's to protect it from the UV. That does have the effect of protecting it from the UV light. It's not because of the algae. The colors of lichens are not due to any algae I know of. They only have either blue-green or green algae. So they don't affect the color. The colors are all due to something else. Okay, now the second one then, the squammy. Oh, I left the S out. I'm sorry. This is supposed to have an S in it. Squamulose. Can I have a marker and write on that? Okay, this is a Cladonia. Is the name of this genus here. It can be erect. It's a squamulose lichen that doesn't have a lower cortex, but it doesn't lay flat on this. It stands up. So that medullary lower surface that would normally hold it in is standing up. It still doesn't have any algae in it. It's just standing up. And, all right, if you can see the pictures in the book, you can take a look at it. It's white on one side and kind of a blue-gray, blue-green-gray on the other side. It stands up. Squamulose lichens can be wavy sometimes and partially stick up. They can stand straight up. And some of them almost look like crustose. There's no distinction, you know, they're kind of gray. There's some of them you can't tell if it's crustose or formulose. Okay, so that's the rules. Let's see. The foliose lichen, the one in the middle there, has both upper and lower. It's like that. It's like the previous slide. It has both upper and lower cortex with no algae in them. Then the triticose lichen. Triticose means shrub, by the way. This one, I mean, there's branching. There's no upper and lower surface, but there's only one cortex that goes all over the land. Okay, so there's algae all the way around the branches of these critical spines. The last one on the right is quite a bit different. It has blue-green algae or blue-green bacteria in it. And it does not have, I told you there were exceptions, this does not have that stratified layer structure. It has the fungal hyphae and the algae strands mixed in together, kind of in a big matrix. All right. It's all tangled up and oh, and it's got the blue-green bacteria. So what happens is it looks black when it dries out. That's what I'll show you some more of that later on, but it doesn't have the structure that this one has. Okay, these two have similar structure. This has a cortex on both sides. This has only one cortex, and this has no cortex. It's just a tangled mess. All right, let's see. So here's some of the really strange looking structures that you find in them. Have y'all looked at what's on your desk yet with your handprints? This might be a really good time. I hadn't thought about this. Take a pause for a minute. If you've got a cell phone, if you've got any kind of a lichen, if you don't have a lichen, somebody pass something behind that last over there. Can I take this back there then? Generally, what happens is if you're outside, oh, and we might need to wet them down. Are they looking? I mean, you see any structures in there? Who is underwhelmed by this? Anybody? I'm not gonna spray you, I promise. I'm gonna spray your lichen. If you're underwhelmed by it. Anybody else need? When you wet them down, even when they're a couple of years old, like some of these, they look pretty good.
The nice thing about lichen is you can find them all year round. So you don't have to wait for them to bloom, you don't have to wait for spring. They're there.
24/7, 365. Can I, you know what? This one's pretty interesting. This is like a swamp. It's only green on one side. Anybody else need it wet? Okay. Oh, that was. Anybody else? A little bit? Some of these have 4 or 5 of them. Right? That's the branches, if you look at a branch and stick those out of the backyard, the old thing, so they're not too. I'm making branches. 30, yeah. Yeah. Come take a look. I did that. Anybody else need water on theirs? Oh my, wow. This is more like it. Wow, what you just said, oh my, well. Yeah. Everybody says. I mean, the first encounter with a lichen, you can tell if your students are actually looking at it. If they're looking at it, that's what they say. They just kind of stand there. You know that either they're very farsighted Or their cell phone's not working, or their mind is not what they're doing. They are what that before you went to? I get everybody back.
Lichens been growing a lot of places too. When we were up in Maine, they told me to go down into the salt spray area of the rocks and bring back some barnacles. And among the barnacles, there's a lichen that will pit the barnacle. Now, if you think about it, this is the reason they can go to sea, because whales have barnacles on them. And they do just fine.
There are marine lichens.
Yeah. They're in a lot of different environments, believe me.
Remember the whales have to come up for air, so they come up and get a little sunshine. Okay, now that you've seen some of these structures, you may recognize some of these things. Well, you won't recognize the names, you'll recognize the pictures. Can you figure out which ones go, what, you know what rhizomes are, I've showed you, which one of these has rhizomes on it? Yeah, this one down here, you see those. So what are these things? That's the cilia. I mean, if you know a little bit of Greek, you know that means hair, right? So, and the cilia are usually on the margins, whereas the rhizomes are on the bottom. Okay, what about pruina? Anybody know what pruina means? I don't know what it means, but it refers to this frostiness. It's like saying ice or hoarfrost. Okay, pruina is this white crystals that are exuded to the surface of a lichen. Some lichens can do it, some can't. If they do, they're pruinos. How about pycnidia? Little bitty black things. I don't know if you can see them from there or not, but these little black things, we'll talk about them in a minute. And how about pseudocephala? If they have pseudocephala, they're called punctate. So if you puncture something, you make a hole in it, right? And so these over here on your far right here, can you see that? Look, there's a hole in the cortex that goes all the way down to the medulla. There's no algae in those little white spots. Okay, that's a hole that goes down to the medulla. Those are the punctate. That's a punctate structure. Okay, the pseudocephalus structure. It is punctate. Okay, let's see. Now, oh, the one more thing I need to tell you about. Let's see. You may be wondering what this is. It's kind of brownish on the inside. That's a sexual spore cup, and we'll talk about that in a minute too. Okay. But before we do, I feel like we need to say something about the algae, because we don't talk about the algae very much. There's tens of thousands of different fungi that make lichens, but they use only maybe a few hundred different algae. So we can't use them to classify the lichens. We use the fungus to classify the lichens, and we just mention what kind of algae, and some of them can use more than one kind of algae. But certainly, a species of algae can be used by more than one fungus. So there's not a tight fit on this. Okay, but as I told you before, when you have a blue-green bacteria, a blue-green lichen, it's because it's using this blue-green bacteria here. Alga is just the Latin word for seaweed. Okay, it's a common name. It doesn't mean anything about how it's classified. It's just a word for things that photosynthesize in water or very wet soil. Okay, they are photosynthesizers, like I said. They can be single-celled or multi-celled, or they can be sheets, or they can be strands. They can be prokaryotic or eukaryotic. They're just, like I said, they just grow on water. So that's what algae means. But green algae are the ones that are in the plant kingdom. They gave rise to all the plants. We have recently put, I wouldn't say recently, it's probably been 10 or 20 years ago, put all the green algae in the plant kingdom. So you really can't, I really do have a reason to be here. Some people think it's just fungus and fungus around plants, but we do have algae. but that's bacteria. The blue-green algae are much smaller in the bacteria kingdom. They are a major nitrogen fixer. When they dry, like I said, this is what they look like dry, and as well as that other picture. You see, it just looks like a dead leaf in the soil. That you may have seen it before. Now, blue-green, I think it's nostoc. Blue-green algae called nostoc. It can live on wet soil. It can even dry out. And then when it rains, it kind of revives and it makes new spores and it grows more and then dries up and it waves. Okay, great nitrogen fixer, but that's what it looks like. And sometimes you can't tell whether there's a fungus in it or not. Sometimes this is just a blue-green algae. Sometimes it's a lichen. You have to get your cell phone out and look for fungal spore capsules. If it's a lichen, it'll have those, we'll talk about it, those capsules, those cups or discs that make sexual spores for the fungus. If it doesn't happen, it's just a nut. Okay. All right. Now, here's where we can talk about sex. Don't tell the education. Fungi have both sexual and asexual spore producers, structures. They're called ascomata. And when they're in a cup or a disc like this, they're called apothecia. Apo means on top of, right? Apothecia. When they're buried inside the thallus, they're called perithecia. They look a lot like those little pygmidia that we saw a few minutes ago. Right? They're little bitty black dots. But these are larger, and these make the sexual spores. The pygmidia make the asexual spores that we saw. Okay. I'm going to pause. Questions? I throw a lot of words out. Yes.
Question. And I want to make sure I got this straight in my brain. So the green algae plant,
Mhm.
but the blue green are not.
They're bacteria. The cells are much smaller, and they're actually blue-green, not green. When we have the algal outbreaks in the lakes, and they say, don't go in the water, it's a blue-green, and it's a bacterium. All right, any other questions? I forget, how long it's taken me. Steve and I have been studying lichens for 20 years, 23 years,
Like that. Yeah.
23
She's been
years.
studying more than me. I support her.
Couldn't have done it without him. Anyway, but we started out together, learning this all together. So there's a lot of it he knows already. And I forget how long it took me to learn it. And I say a lot of words, and I just want to make sure everything sinks in before I say too many more.
Among other things, don't eat them.
Yeah.
Because they have fungus in them, and just like a lot of the fungus, they will give you wild dreams or maybe go further and kill you.
Except for the ones that.
There are a few that you can do.
Yeah, the Native Americans used, I believe it was, can I remember which species? It was just, I'm sorry, I can't remember which genus it is, but they use it for stomach cancer. And it helps. It's therapeutic.
Another question.
Mhm.
Does anyone know what is the lifespan?
It's pretty much unlimited because it has indeterminate, yeah, it can grow and then, you can't, if a piece of it breaks off and goes somewhere else, is that the same plant?
It's kind of like those mushrooms that grow in the forest that spread.
That I think that was, or even trees that, their roots underground, where does the organism end?
If you go to a cemetery, a lot of times you'll see a lichen there. And in Europe, for example, they use them sometimes to date something by the rate at which they grow, because they can grow for 1,000 years.
Wow.
They're, some of them can, some of them can't, of course, but
Anyway, yes.
Which lichens that grow on trees are edible? Is there any that are edible that grow on trees?
There's none that taste good. Elk and deer have been known to eat lichen either on the ground or on bark. It's a starvation food. They don't eat it unless they have. Now, insects and birds that don't have much preference about what they eat lichens all the time. But vertebrate animals generally taste stuff and like.
I've eaten rock tripe.
Oh, now that might be an exception.
That's the only one that I know of, and not that I'm not a researcher like you. That's the only one I know of that I can eat.
Right, and you know, we found that in Oklahoma.
It is.
The Wichita Mountains, you know, the granite outcrops. If you find a crevice in there, you can find, it's not as big as, I mean, our rock tracker was this big. Okay. But I have a picture of Steve's hand by one that has, it looks like leaves this big. There's a big boulder and it looks like it's got leaves this big on it and it's all rock.
Yeah, that's what we have in New England.
Yeah. Right. That's exactly what it was. Okay, now talking about a little bit more of these. Did I finish that? Yes. Oh, you got it, okay. Now, like I said before, the pycnidia here are a little bit smaller. These are for asexual reproduction. They're quite a bit smaller than the Parathecia. But there's also some that are a little bit larger, and they're not always black. This one on this yellow lichen down here, see a little orange? Those are also pycnidia. It's just a place where the asexual, the conidia, you know, conidia is a fungal term for spore. Okay, that's where those are produced. They can also reproduce asexually, but this of them break off from the upper cortex. This is not acidia. These are little things that stick up. I think there's a page number for you on this. These little things, these little projections stick out of the surface, and they can easily break off. Now, acidia have a cortex over them, so you get a little bit of algae in those. The Charidia that are on the edge of these, can you see the little pillow-like puffs on the edges of this foliose lichen here? Those are Charidia. They don't have a cortex over them, but there's usually a few algal cells mixed in. So if an insect or a bird or some animal would brush by them, some of them would come off and it would travel with that animal and be deposited somewhere else. So this, like I said, this is asexual reproduction. And this one over here is really kind of strange. This is a leprous lichen. It's not 1,000 years old, but it has no cortex. Okay, it's just a big bundle of Charidia, a big bundle of fungal hyphae with algae strands mixed in little balls. And it is even more easily broken off and taken. And those are asexual reproduction for the algae. I'm sorry, for the fungus. As far as the algae is concerned, algae rarely reproduce sexually in a lichen. We just haven't heard of it happen, at least I haven't heard of it happen. I've been told that they don't. But you know about the exceptions, right? They're just gonna break off when the Isidia or Charidia. They're just gonna go with them asexually. But something I've learned recently is when you have a sexual reproducing cup, like an Eskimo, this epiphyseal lichen, sometimes the spores inside come with a gel covering on. So when they blow out, if they blow over or come in contact with some algal cells, they'll pick them up and take the algal cells with the sexual reproduction spore of the fungus. So lots of different ways of getting around. Okay, now, I told you before that sometimes it's kind of hard to tell the difference between a moss and a lichen. But you can see that. I mean, I put samples of each one in those little trays. And if you have somebody behind you that doesn't have a little box or across the aisle, you might show them the difference between a fungus, between an algae. Wait, just try to see that. Between the two things we're talking about. Lichens and mosses. And it's really kind of easy, you know, the water we sprayed on the lichen. If you've got your hand lens, did I get the moss wet too? Is the moss wet? I stuck a moss today. Did we go to, oh, we went to the regional park.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's nice and fresh, the soil is good, so you can probably use your hand lens or something on it. And you don't have to hold it up to the light, but you can see light through it. Probably the best thing to do is to hold it up to light, and I don't know, maybe your hand is just this or that. But you know, it'll look like this. You can actually see the cells. They're so large. In the moss leaf, you can see the cells. You can see through the cells in the moss. But if you hold the lichen up to the light, you don't see anything. The hive here is so thick and dense, the light doesn't shine through, and the cells are so much smaller. That's the fastest way to tell. Now, another thing is mosses are more like plants than other biological specimens. You know, what else is in the phylum, yeah, biology. Yeah, that's the word I'm thinking of. Bryophytes, okay. There's other bryophytes that look more like lichens than moss do. I mean, you can see that the moss has a stalk and has leaves on it, right? And once you get to holding everything, it's easy to tell the difference. But there are some other ones that aren't. Let's see. For instance, yes, talk to this side for a while. For instance, this is a hornwort, this is a liverwort, and of course, this is the moss. Well, this is a lichen. So doesn't that liverwort looks more like a lichen than a moss does? But the same thing is true. You shine a light through it, you can see light through the liverwort. You can't see the light through the light. Okay. Once again, this is the blue-green, the cyanobacteria. Let me read what I got here so I don't leave something out. Lichens are in the fungus kingdom. Mosses, hornworts, liverworts are in the plant kingdom. The bryophytes are classified between the green algae and the tracheophytes. Notice that the fungi are not here. Okay. So these are fairly closely related, but they're still not vascular plants, are they? They're very, very simple. They don't have stems and leaves. So you should be able to tell them from a lichen. I mean, sorry, from a moss. You could tell these from a moss, but you would have to shine a light sometimes to tell it. Okay. Now, the one on the lower right is this blue-green lichen. They call them cyanolichens. They have cyanobacteria in them, which are also known as blue-green algae. Okay, that's very good. And the algae are in the bacteria kingdom, but the lichen is still a fungus. Yeah. Just getting kind of long and windy.
No, but I got to
Yes.
clear up. A lichen itself is in what kingdom?
They call it in fungus. They base it on the fungus, so it's in the fungi.
Okay. But if you split it apart between the blue-green bacteria and fungus, then you would have one in the fungus kingdom and the other one in the, what is it now? Proto.
What do they call bacteria?
It's bacteria.
Oh, it's bacteria.
Bacteria kingdom?
Bacteria, not bacteria.
It's not organic, it's just regular
Just
bacteria.
regular bacteria kingdom. Okay. Thank you.
It's not new bacteria anymore?
Oh, actually, bacteria would be the more appropriate term.
Oh, okay.
And you just EU in front of it, and prove.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, college in 65. And then they were all thinking it, so. I've learned this and then, oh, it's not that. It's this and then it's not that. And then this is not that.
So, that's how many kingdoms there are now. It depends on how you
split up the protista, which is where they found it. So there's always the, plant, animal, fungi, and then the prokaryotes, the protista, is like a trash can group. It doesn't fit in one of those other three plant, animal, fungi, they just throw it in there.
Humans are so restricted by our perspective.
Yeah.
You know, if things existed before we had words for them, we just chose the wrong words. Let's see, macroscopically, a moss colony can look like a pincushion or a flat velvety mat. Like the other bryophytes, they're so small that the nutrients can pass from one end to the other just by diffusion. They don't need a vascular system. It's just a bunch of overlapping leaves like that. I'll give you another picture in a minute. The leaves sometimes have a midrib. You can't really find the midrib here, but that's a characteristic that's used to identify the mosses. There's really not as much diversity in mosses as there is in the lichens. Some are more yellow green, some are more blue green, as you can see the difference in one on the top and one on the bottom. The leaves can have a little point on them, a little hair, or they can be blunt. Yeah, that pretty much covers it. Oh, we can talk about sex. Asexual spore capsule
Pick up
on
for,
the far right. Okay. These are asexual spore capsule. Okay. And there can be a lot of difference in those. Now, there are a few things up here. Now we're ready. Here's what textbooks say about mosses. Quite a bit more than they say about lichens. Okay. Like ferns, mosses don't produce seeds. Their asexual spores grow into kinetophytes in the soil. Okay. Then they produce gametes that must remain wet for sexual reproduction. Once fertilization takes place, a new plant grows and forms asexual spores again. These spores can be carried by the wind until they land in wet soil. If they say something like that. They do it, because lichens do it in so many different ways. It would take 10 pages. Once you get started on lichens, there's no stopping. Anyway, so take a look at this moss structure from top to bottom. How does it compare to a fern? Pretty good, right? Got a little bit of rhizoid down here, some leaves, and maybe a stalk. Some ferns have a stalk like this with it makes spores at the top. A lot of ferns just have their spores on the leaves in here. But basically, it looks much like any other plant, doesn't it? And look anything like them. See, like lichens, pieces of mosses can simply break off also and be transported by the wind or the birds and continue on somewhere else. But they can make, if they're stressed, they can make these paraphilia. These are just extra branching on the tips of it, and they're more fragile. They break off easier, and so they're more likely to be taken by a bird or an insect. I should have given you more of the picture because it was just looked like a regular moss at the bottom. This is just a bunch of branches again. And if you put it on the microscope, you can see the individual cell can just break. That's not a picture. I didn't think about how that would blow up. But anyway, they break really easily, and any part of that can break off. The cells can grow into this asexual. All right. Now we're getting more than just mosses and bryophytes and lichens. There are other things in that tree community, but this isn't the entomology society, is it? But we're going to talk about it. Some of these are the animals that transport those paraphilia and those Cerida and those Isidia and pieces of lichens and mosses. Some of these organisms also use the mosses and the lichens as food. In a tree community, which of these is an herbivore? You know, which ones are herbivore? Just, I'm not testing you, just, do you remember any of them? The tardigrade, here's some bacteria, there's an ant. Oh, that looks like some kind of a protozoan. Snail, spider. Ooh, that looks like a mouse. I don't think so, all kinds of spiders. Did I say tardigrade? And those are infamous for living in lichens too. So they all live in there and they eat, not just leaves.
What is that called? The
Tardigrade.
tardigrade?
Tardigrade.
Tardigrade.
Water bear, there you go, thank you.
Do they live in it or?
They, they crawl around all over it. What you're asking, you find these growing all over the moss and sometimes I bring the sample home. My office is the extra bedroom, you know, and I have a card table in there for temporary when I bring stuff home, I just go in there and I'll pick up one of them and I'll take the microscope and I'll look at it, there'll be something crawling around inside of it. But we do have to, we put them in an ultra-cold freezer before we put them in the herbaria. We leave them there until they're dead.
Yeah.
But, you know, it doesn't always kill the lichen. Think about it, the lichen are sometimes very exposed. These little things can go and hide underneath and around them. The lichen has to stay on the rock. And it can withstand temperatures down well below 0 and well above 100. So lichens are okay, but it kills off the pests when you put them in. Was there another question? Oh, the widow's rat, that's right. Did anybody use them? Okay, anyway, go ahead. All right, so here's some answers. More or less. I'll just let you take a look at that. That's the tardigrades consume all our primates. They don't go out and attack anything. It's,
You spray these and they look more living. Are they alive or are they just with pressure? Do they come back to life after they've dried out?
excellent question. I'm so glad, I should have mentioned that when I was writing it down. The water makes the hyphae on the top more translucent so that the algae underneath are more visible. Yeah. How dead are they? It's kind of a gradient, all right? Some of the lichens, like the ones in the box, are at least a year old. You put them out in their original environment, they might take hold and live some more. Some of them, especially the ones on the trees, you could probably take back. But what I found is when you move a lichen from one environment to another, the light is different, the water availability is different, the whole atmosphere, there may be pollution. It's really difficult for me to bring a lichen home and have it stay alive. I throw it up in the back of my native plant garden up against the fence where it gets a little bit of shelter and it's the most sun it can. Sun. Anyway, and some of them live and some of them die. On the other hand, Adam, you know Adam, who does landscaping, he brought me rocks that had lichen on them. I thought, oh, but he thought he was doing me a really good favor for me. These rocks from my garden that had lichens on them. They don't have that on them. Yes.
How can you tell if they're alive or dead?
How long you plan on living? It takes, I mean, you can watch it, you just have to watch it. If it grows, it's alive.
Watch it, see if it changes.
Yeah, there are a couple of clues. Generally, if it has a color to it, like green or whatever, and it turns white, that means the algae died. And if the algae died, it, I guess it's not behind. Sometimes if they have a kind of a reddishness to them, they're dead, but you know there are red lichens. So sometimes if it turns a little bit red, that means some of the chemical design have changed. And some of the pigments will turn kind of red. Anyway, it's hard to tell that there are. Yes, Rob.
Do lichens, do certain species of lichens guess you could call
It was.
to certain species of lichens. And I guess you can call a lichen a species, right? Do they grow, they have preference of what kind of tree they like to grow
Ah,
Hmm.
I like that question. Some do, some don't, except for the exceptions.
on? Can you be a little more clear?
Because literally, some lichens are specific for a specific plant species, and some are not. Some will live only on rock, some only on bark, some on both, and some on barnacles.
There are some that like rotting wood, and there are some that like stone.
And there are some that like the canvas on the back of her sleeve. The asphalt on your shingles. Any place that will hold water that's porous is liable to have a fungus growing on it that has a lichen. I mean, that has an algae that is a lichen.
There are some places we've seen like, steel fence. And if it gets painted with the right paint that will hold water, the lichen will grow on that.
Old wrinkled paint will hold water on it, or if it's rusted. You've seen an old car that's got lichen on it, it's because it has rusted, and it is a place where the fungus can make hyphae that stick into that rust.
Some of those environments, though, they may be there, but they may not grow very well. You know, that's not an ideal environment.
Okay, now I want you to know that lichens don't consume any part of any other organism. They cannot consume, they have no mouth, they have no way, they can't absorb it, they take their food from the algae. I don't know of any exception. In some cases, lichens can absorb minerals from the environment. And there are some that grow only in places where that mineral is. I'm trying to think of, copper.
You talking about like the salt one or the?
Well, there's some of those too, yeah. There's some that will only live in where there's a certain mineral. And there are some that will use a mineral in some way, but they don't use it for energy. It's not mineral, it's not an energy source. Okay.
Some of them will absorb salt, but then they can't handle it, so the salt comes out on the surface. And, you know, they're kind of a rare thing.
So they don't kill plants, but they often use those dead organisms as a substrate on which they can absorb water or access sunlight.
For the most part, if they're on a tree, the tree is okay. But if the tree dies, they're the first thing that will start breaking it down.
Right. The tree is weakened in some way. It's not, the bark on the outside is dead. You know, bark is dead, right? So it's just a good place for the lichens to grow. They don't have to have.
Am I ahead of you?
No, I just caught up with you. Oh, go back one.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, you were. Okay. There's a lot of nutrient recycling that goes on in the tree community, and I can see I didn't think I would take an hour, but I really like it. How do lichens help the decomposition of bark without consuming it? Anybody know? You know, I told you it makes pigments. It also makes acids of all kinds. 100 different acids that lichens can make, and that's what breaks down the bark. For what reason, we don't know, it just does. Okay. It's a good way to test for them. If there's a test for a particular kind of an acid, you can test for it, you can see if it's that species, if that species makes that acid. It's a good way to identify them, but that's how they break it down. And the same thing for rock, it breaks down granite into the soil, you know, at the base of those granite mountains, Wichita Mountains. The soil at the bottom has been broken down by lichens and fungus and so, water cracking, you know, and water freezing and cracking and all that. Okay. How else do tree communities, populations use each other? Well, take a look at this. What did the bird use the lichen for? And what benefit is the bird for the lichen?
Spreads.
Spreads it. Okay. How about this this is a bug, and I have seen one of these with lichen on its back. So what's the benefit of the lichen for the bug? camouflage and vice, and also it's gonna, you're about to transport some of that, like on the far right. Okay, bird nest here. We have mossing. Right? Same thing that it's gonna do here. It's gonna insulate that bird's egg, and that bird is gonna pull some of that moss. So moss and lichens are both good for bird nests. Now, I know I promised tree communities, and if you look at this, they had a fire a few years ago, there aren't any trees left at Selman. At least very, very few, so I can't talk about the trees at Selman, but it's really interesting, so I can't leave this out, all right? It looks like nothing is in there between the grass, but trees that would normally hold the moisture and make shade and allow enough moisture to stay put are not there. Selman is special. You know what kind of soil is it, Selman? Gypsum and red clay. Gypsum and red clay. Both of them hold water. Different. They can hold water for a long period of time. Gypsum
Versus Alabama.
progresses to the next slide.
We're there. Right.
Okay, gypsum dissolves and crystallizes with every rain event. This makes for a very dynamic surface texture, and it's a challenge for photosynthesizing organisms that grow among those ever-changing crystals. Most of us don't expect to see microscopic organisms in the field or even in the forest or anywhere. So we don't look at them until the first time we see them through the hammer. So after tonight, you're going to go up, use your cell phone, you're going to go up to every tree and you're going to look at lichens, right? It is not until we get curious about what grows in those microscopic environments that we see the disturbance that we make by walking. See a footprint here? Okay. And that's sitting right here. Would have wiped out that whole little colony right here.
In some sections of there, they do create, it does compressed alabaster. And the alabaster is clear. And the lichen and the other things you can find like a quarter of an inch below the surface. Because the light can reach it, and there's water sometimes. This is Selman, sometimes.
At Selman, you find mostly thick crust. I'm reading this because it's kind of complicated. So listen carefully. I'll not try not to read it too fast. At Selman, you find mostly thick crustose and squamulose lichens and the red clay soil. You know, those that stick to the substrate and the gypsum outcomes. The lichen on the left is naturally red, not due to the red clay. Red clay doesn't stay put during the rainstorm. The clay soil absorbs water and flows downhill. You know that about it, right? It flows downhill, leaving the lichens and mosses either exposed or embedded in that red clay mud. When it dries out, it doesn't get deposited as crystals on the lichen surface like gypsum does. The lichen and the gypsum on the right is actually a dark brown. It's actually a dark brown. The surface of lichens is hydrophobic. Okay. After the rain, the gyp water sits on it long enough to completely and slowly evaporate. That allows the gypsum crystals to form. During dry spells, lichen has to grow around the new crystals until the rain dissolves them again and the arid environment recrystallizes the gypsum. I showed this to some of my fellow lichenologists from the East. They have never seen anything like this before. And they could no more identify that lichen. It's so covered with gypsum. They couldn't figure out what kind it was. I had to do this finally. I washed all the gypsum off before I could identify this particular species. Okay, now. If this has seemed a little bit confused, before I left for Hawaii 2 weeks ago, I had this in a can. It was ready to go. All right, when I got back, I got back on Sunday. I didn't look at this till Monday. I said, this is totally not good. I redid the whole cotton picking thing. And I added a little bit about Hawaii. I hope you don't. What I found was they weren't as abundant as I thought they were going to be. I thought they would just be hanging from the trees and no. I saw about as many as I see in Oklahoma's wedding. And like Oklahoma, the lichens I saw in Hawaii were mostly crustose and foliose. Only 2 species of fruticose lichens. It could be due to the isolation of, because you think about what it takes to get there. All right, what I can't account for is why weren't there more fruticose? But if anybody's got an idea, I'm open to it. Maybe some idea. I did not get a chance to speak to any lichenologists in Hawaii, but maybe Hawaii doesn't have lichenologists and maybe they're just not vocal enough. I don't know. But there's only 2 species of lichens that were mentioned in the nature guides at the park, and I went through all 6 of them. And we have both of those genera here in Oklahoma, the Teleschistes and the Usnea. And I don't know who has, I have them up here if you want to take a look at them later. They're just simple little ones like, this is a Usnea. If you look, if this is a bush, and every one of these little white spots is an Usnea. It doesn't grow up. It grows in trees in Oklahoma. It doesn't grow in shrubs. That's what it looks like close up. Teleschistes is another one we have. We have a sample of it. But anyway, I can't account for why they didn't. There was not one word about any of the crustose or foliose or from any other lichens in the books. It's kind of like we only have these 2 lichens, and you can and they were pretty rare, and they missed all of the rest of it. And I talked to the biologist, the nature person there, and she didn't know very much about anyway, so Hawaii needs somebody to find their lichens, and if you need a job in a tropical paradise, tell some of your students, Adam, they need lichenologists. Evidently, they told us, the lady told me they had 11 ecosystems in Maui. There's probably more than that, but yeah, she said 11. It's not that big. 11? How many do we have in Oklahoma? How many? 13? And think about how much smaller the islands in Hawaii. Yeah. Anyway, so.
Next page.
If you want to remember, shave and spreading both sexual and asexual spores with your knees. Join in on the next lichen. We'll try to learn it.
They're actually finding very small lichens. That's what they're down on their hands.
I need help spreading the word. These are fairly renowned lichenologists. This is Bill Buck from from New York Botanical Gardens. This is James Lindemer. He's a biologist. He's a lichenologist. And I found these lichens on the ground, and I looked and said, look at there. And then everybody came over and they were looking at me like, this is anyway. I have any other questions? I'm sorry, I've taken a little bit extra time, but it was worth it. Are there any questions? I think that's